2 days ago, a majority of my fellow Britons made the most dramatic gesture in our modern history by voting to leave the European Union. We're still absorbing the result, and the country remains almost equally divided about it. Leaving will have consequences, but those of us who voted to leave have been concentrating on what we think will be very positive results, not just for this country, but for the wider world. While Britain was in the EU, we lost control of our country and our borders. European bureaucrats and judges in the European Court of Justice could and did override laws passed by our own Parliament. A government report released in April conceded that EU law overrode UK law and that the European Court trumped the British Supreme Court. Over 60% of UK laws were made in or derived from Brussels. Even our efforts to fight terrorism were undermined by judges in the EU Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, who blocked things like the deportation of terrorists. By regaining full sovereignty, we believe we can restore pride in our nation, freedom to pursue our own trade deals with the rest of the world, and freedom to make our own decisions in foreign policy. Those of us who support Israel are delighted to leave behind an organisation that is deeply antagonistic to the Jewish state, and a continent in which anti-Semitism is growing by leaps and bounds. Last year, the European Union badly mishandled the sudden crisis of mass immigration into its territories. It was not wrong to take in Syrian refugees, but although Europe's moral purpose was praiseworthy, it was wrong not to know more about them. Some 60% of the incomers were not Syrians, and very quickly this tide of new arrivals from Africa and as far away as Afghanistan unleashed social problems on a large scale. The problem was never immigration itself. In many ways, fresh immigrants can strengthen countries and regions and deserve to be welcomed. But mass immigration, when poorly controlled by the authorities, can have destructive consequences. For one thing, once people start to come in large numbers from poor countries, a process will be created that will only end when everyone has sought a better but often wretched life in their host countries, and home countries have been almost emptied. Many past immigrants have benefited the UK. Migrants have settled down, found employment, and become British in all the ways that count. Democrats contributing to the betterment of their host nations. Except, that is, for a very large proportion of incomers from Muslim countries. Many Muslims do integrate very well and become politicians, doctors, academics, writers, businessmen, and much more. Others integrate only partly, and modern surveys of Muslim opinion show high levels of overt rejection of Western values and, for example, strong support for Islamic Sharia law. There are now enclaves across Europe, notably in Britain, France, Sweden and Germany, where it is difficult or even dangerous for non-Muslims to enter. The creation of these so-called no-go zones has increased greatly since the 2015 and 2016 migrations. Whole districts in Britain look more like the Middle East or Pakistan than England. Trevor Phillips, a former chairman of Britain's Equality and Human Rights Commission and head of the Commission for Racial Equality, had been Britain's leading exponent of multiculturalism. He was a strong and honest believer in bringing together communities of different faiths and cultures, and a sincere opponent of racism and communal hatred, ideals all good-hearted people share. But last year, he admitted that the integration of Muslims had been a disastrous failure. He put it thus: "For a long time, I too thought that Europe's Muslims would become like previous waves of migrants, gradually abandoning their ancestral ways, wearing their religious and cultural baggage lightly, and gradually blending into Britain's diverse identity landscape. I should have known better. Europe has opened its doors to masses of people who share few, if any, of our values: democracy, man-made laws, free speech, religious tolerance. The EU has been complicit in welcoming people who despise us, hate our way of life, and even work to subvert our societies. Among the genuine refugees fleeing Syria have come many violent jihadis, and Europe still bears the scars in Paris, in Brussels, and elsewhere. Britain is once again free, like other independent nations, such as the United States and Israel, to control its own borders, make its own laws, direct its own future, and to insist on its most basic values once again. This is Dennis McKeown for the Gatestone Institute in London.